Thank you so much, Paul. It's fantastic to hear you talk about the vision there, and a lot of it is about change. This fantastic vision for the future, but also, internally, you're looking at how do we make that happen, and taking a really reflective approach as well, which strikes me as very forward thinking, I think, for how we do need to move forward. So what I'm intrigued about after having heard that is, why did this come about? How did it come about? And why is now the time to move forward, given that it really is about a big transformation, actually?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is. It's huge, and we're not. That's not lost on us at all. So how it came about, I think, is as soon as COVID started, we recognised at an early stage that this would work through phases. So when I joined the post in October of last year, the department was very much in the early phases of COVID and probably starting to transition out into recovery. So while that was our current operating environment, we recognised that we need to think ahead as well, and really important for the department to set out its vision of where we're going. So rather than just being continually caught up in the immediate crisis, and they were crises, and trying to provide that immediate support to businesses, it was hugely important that the department also set out, well, what's that long-term vision for Northern Ireland, and use that as a reference point and a guiding star as we work through the crisis response into COVID recovery and that longer term renew. So that we were aware of that had to be done at the start. Why now? I think a crisis is the perfect time to reimagine what the future looks like. And so that wasn't lost on us at all. And I think as well, why now is there is an alignment happening in Northern Ireland at the moment, which doesn't happen very often. So there's an alignment of people like the ones that I'm joined on this panel with, of that people get that we're in a moment where we can actually achieve real significant change. And there's an alignment, I think, in terms of a sense of the structural weaknesses that we've had in our economy can't be tolerated any longer, that we need to make real significant change to impact upon them. And the fact that COVID is making those problems worse, I think, has probably galvanized people and really catalyzed action. So now is exactly the time to do something really bold, really ambitious. And I think given that there's an alignment of people that want to make that change, not only is ambitious thing, a nice thing to do, it's the right thing to say, we genuinely believe it can happen because the people are there to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking there, you had both a reactive, but then also took a very proactive approach to what we do coming out of this, which has clearly stood you in very good stead. And there's a lovely metaphor there, really, that I actually recall Steve using on one occasion about how, this is about phoenixing out of the ashes here. This is that moment, and it's fantastic that there is a lot of alignment on it. I'd like to shift now to Rosemary, who's joining us via Zoom, because I think that leads on really nicely to a question I have for her, which is, Rosemary, what do you think are the strengths of this vision, and how does it compare, and how is it different then to previous economic strategies that have been brought to the table in the past?
Good question. I think that one of the things you find when you look at economic strategies is that they all use very similar words. If you pulled out the economic strategies of almost any region in the world, you would see the same themes appearing. So what is fundamentally different, I think, about this approach is not so much about the what, but the how. And following on as Paul was from the experience of COVID and not wasting a crisis. One of the things that COVID demonstrated to us is what can happen when we focus, when we collaborate, and we are driven by necessity to do things differently. And some of us were aware of the fact, and I'm sure everyone on the call falls into that category, that the competitiveness of Northern Ireland as a region was just gradually slipping. Not that we were stopping to perform, it's just other people were stepping up and performing better. So a few of us recognized that we had an economic crisis in Northern Ireland, but it wasn't as apparent as the COVID crisis. And I think the fabulous thing that Paul and the team in the department and all those who sort of helped work on this strategy have done is they've recognized what are the pieces that in order to drive to true change you need to have. And it really is about focus, It is about using innovation to drive. It is about collaborating. It is about using the levers that we have and being quite clear about what it is we need to do, wrapping that up so that everyone benefits at the end of this. It is no good if a sector of our community succeeds, and whether it's other subparts of our community, whether it's other regions, or whether it's sections of our community, everybody has to benefit, which is why prosperity is a key measure in this. It has to improve our lives. It has to improve everyone's life. There has to be something in this for everyone. So we need symbiotic relationships in these solutions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, the inclusivity element of the vision is just really inspiring to see. And I was interested there in your reflections, Rosemary, just around how in some ways the crisis of COVID, which affected everybody, and brought everybody together in a very collaborative sense, almost really foreground both the need for that in terms of how to move forward and how productive that approach can be, but also how there were two crises here, really, that COVID crisis and also that economic crisis. Do you really think that, it was that foreground a lot of these issues?
Well, I think the data would tell you that our productivity, despite lots of effort, productivity rates in Northern Ireland haven't increased at the rate we would like. Competitiveness hasn't improved in the way we'd like. So it depends how you define a crisis. I think it was a crisis.
Well, thank you very much for your insight there. With that in mind, and the idea that it's very clear there's a real vision here for change, Steve, and that change is needed. And Rosemary put it very saliently there. She felt really, we are at a crisis point here from an economic perspective. What do you think of the ambition outlined in the programme? Do you, one, think it's achievable, and do you, two, think it's ambitious enough?
Well, I think just building on what Rosemary said, and also what Paul said, over the last year or two, and strangely during COVID, there has been this outbreak of collaboration in Northern Ireland. All of the institutions that play a role within innovation over this last year came together in one team. And I think part of that initial opportunity was around the UK levelling up, and the UK government levelling up agenda, and the opportunity that's hopefully going to come around that. But I think together we needed something which was longer term that helped to define the common purpose. So credit to Paul for having the courage, from within the department, because the department is the right organization to take a leading role on this, but to actually say, okay, guys, this is our Everest, right? And I know Paul said earlier that the publishing the 10X paper has been the easy bit, but I think in all the work that's going to go next is going to be the hard stuff. But even just that moment of saying 10X is our Everest, but not only that, it's I think the shared sense of ownership that so many people and so many institutions all feel about 10X today, which makes me feel that what's going to come next when you think about what it takes in order to climb Everest. The amount of organization, the number of people that are involved in the planning, the logistics, the supplies, and everything. None of us on our own, no organizations, no people on our own, were ever going to be able to achieve what all of us would have desired for Northern Ireland. But I think this is the unifying purpose. And it's the fact that, is it ambitious enough? I think the right test is 10X sort of terrifying? Does it make everybody uncomfortable? It just feels too bold, and it definitely does that. So I think it's just the brilliant start.
Lovely. And I'm reminded there when you're speaking, Steve, Paul, of those quotations. I love that slide, and the one where we make this choice because it's the hard choice as opposed to the easy choice. I think that's really foreground in what you're saying there, Steve. So we do have a little bit of time for a couple of questions from the floor. If you have
Hannah, if I could interrupt just for a moment, if that's possible. I think there was another important dimension of this, is that there is a whole heap, whilst it's challenging, it's optimistic. And when you look at we all experience our day-to-day lives and what's happening and the challenges with government in Northern Ireland and all of the uncertainty, What Paul has done is he's come out with something positive. Yes, it's challenging, but it's moving us forward positively. Similarly, when our new chief executive Invest came on board, he looked at the situation. He said, well, we have to sell our way out of this as a region. Shouldn't our goal as a region to be self-sufficient? And I think part of, it's not that it's not a good idea, it's a very good idea, but I think it's also the right idea at the right time. And we all need hope in our lives, and we all need to see that there is a better way. And I think that's what this also does.
I think it's very inspiring. I think probably most people here would agree today. And also it's ambitious, which is great. We need to raise those ambition levels. But just to sort of flag for a moment, we do have time for questions. Please, if you have any, pop them in the chat. And while we're waiting for any questions there to populate, I'd just like to go back to you, Paul, for a moment, because you talked about how this is a really pivotal point in which there's a lot of alignment which can help move this forward. I think each of you on the panel touched on that in your discussion. Who is it that's aligning? Can you give us some context on that? What's the significance of it? And just say a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the people that I'm joined with here, Rosemary and Steve, are agitators in chief. They are seized of the importance of exactly the moment that we're at, and I think certainly in civil service I see the phrase once in a generation opportunity used a lot, but I genuinely think that this is a once in a generation opportunity. And there's people like Steve, Rosemary, there's Jane Brady, who obviously will be my new boss in the near future. Has been leading the way, and in many ways I was fortunate in joining the post that I joined in October, is because these guys were very active up until that point, and what they were missing was just the department stepping in and providing, as Steve says, that there's things that only a department and only a minister can do, and that's what we did. And that's part of the exercise that we're here today and speaking to you guys, is because we know there's more of those people out there. There's more people that go, we can make a difference. We can really make this change happen. So we want to, as the slide says at the start, if you feel like that, you're not alone. There's plenty of people out there. We're here. We're amongst them. And we think that if we can organize ourselves and through the development, the work program, structure this in a way that we can sort of define the problems, develop the solutions, we can make that impact that that the Everest is achievable.
Yes, I think you're the queen of, or the king, should I say, of the metaphors there. But go on, you were going to share something with us, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, and I think this is why today's conversation is important, because the people who are on the call as well are the entrepreneurs. They're the people who are leading really important, multinational organizations here in the operations. And so if you look at we're under no illusions that we're not going to be the heroes in this story. The heroes in the story are the entrepreneurs, because we need more people here to build more companies in Northern Ireland that are going to make it to scale. We need more multinational corporations to have breakthrough science technology here that sends a signal to the world. But it's important for us, and with this alignment, is that we can, and especially with government, we can create the environment which creates an advantage for entrepreneurs starting a company here. How can we start to look at the closed loop of procurement? How can we start to look at what are the advantages legally that we can create, in this environment here to give everybody the best start and to really get to scale?
That's fantastic. Now we do have a couple of questions that have come in. So let's see. Paul, could you please offer an example of activity that needs to stop? So that's to give everyone an insight into the department's appetite for change. So thank you very much for, I'll not say who sent in that message to us, but Paul, perhaps you could give us some insight on that then.
Yeah, really good question. Not an easy one to answer. I think we will need to see more of the activity that's focused on the technologies and clusters that are in strength. I think, Rosemary mentioned what's good about this strategy is that it's focused. So we've identified where we have strengths and where we have capacity and capability to be world beating. We need to focus on that. And as a consequence of that, that means we are not doing a thin jam approach to economic policy. So more focus on areas of strength, more strategic thinking about where we see our exports, where we see our investment, less trying to do everything for everybody, but encouraging more people to participate in the aspects where we've got real strengths.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hopefully that answers your question. So we don't have very many questions coming through there, but I don't think that's any real issue because you're all now going to have a great opportunity to share your insights and to share your expertise and really feed back into the development of the strategy that's going to come out of this vision. So you'll receive an invitation in a moment to join a breakout room. We have facilitators in each of those breakout rooms, and we'll be posing a series of questions. Those questions range from everything to what barriers have you experienced to entrepreneurship, through what your thoughts are on the clusters in the 5 focus areas, questions around how industry and government might work better together. And we really want to hear your thoughts on this because you are on the ground and you have a lot to contribute. So you'll join your facilitator, share that feedback, and then we'll come back and we'll hear back from those facilitators. And you'll also have a chance to frame a question within your group that you would like to pose to the panel before we close out. So if you just follow those invitation links, we'll see you back all here in about 15 to 20 minutes.